How brazen was this killer?
My DNA couldn't have been in that car because I've never been in that car.
What if I told you that the safest place you know could become the scene of your worst nightmare? Janai Coleman was a teacher, a mother, and the kind of person who made the world feel a little softer just by being in it. Every Friday night, she waited in her car for her daughter to finish her shift, just like always. But on July 18th, 2008, that routine shattered in an instant. A stranger approached her window. A gunshot rang out.
The suspect pointed the gun at the victim, fired the shot.
And just like that, a life built on love and stability was stolen in a parking lot. This isn't just a story about a crime, it's about how quickly everything can change, and the chilling question that still haunts everyone who knew her. Why Janai? Janai Coleman. Life before the tragedy. To understand the weight of what happened that night, you have to know who Janai Coleman was before her name became part of a police file. She was the kind of woman people noticed, but not because she wanted them to. Janai had a warmth that drew people in quietly, steady eye contact, a laugh that landed softly, and a calmness that could settle any storm. She was an elementary school teacher, the type who remembered every child's birthday and slipped encouragement into their notebooks when she saw their confidence slipping. Her classroom was more than a place for lessons. It was a safe space for the kids who didn't have one anywhere else. Outside of school, Janai's life was anchored by her 3 adopted children. She hadn't just taken them in, she had built a world around them. She made sure they had stability, routines, and the kind of love that didn't waver. Every Friday night was part of that routine. Her daughter worked at a restaurant near Gwinnett Place Mall, and Janai would be there without fail to pick her up when her shift ended. No matter how tired she was, no matter what else was going on, that gold Dodge Stratus would be in the lot, waiting. Friends and neighbors knew her as someone who kept to herself, but was always willing to help. She wasn't the kind of person who made enemies, she didn't chase trouble, and she certainly didn't expect it to find her. That July evening, the familiar patterns of her life moved forward without interruption, until they didn't. It's the cruelest thing about tragedy. It almost always begins on a day that feels like any other. The sun had set hours earlier, the heat of summer still clinging to the air. Janai parked her car, maybe listened to music or scrolled through her phone while she waited. This was her comfort zone, close to her daughter's work, near a restaurant she'd been to before, and in a public lot she thought was safe. But somewhere nearby, out of her sight, someone else was watching, and in just a few minutes, her life, so carefully built, so devoted to others, would be stolen in a way no one who knew her could ever make sense of. The attack in the parking lot, the moments before it happened, were unremarkable, almost mundane. Cars came and went. A bus pulled up at the stop across the street. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. Janai sat behind the wheel of her gold Dodge Stratus, the air inside still warm from the day. She was in no rush. Her daughter's shift would be over soon, and then they would drive home together like they always did. Across the way, at a nearby gas station, a man stepped out of the store. In one of them was a gun, the kind of weapon that doesn't just threaten, it decides. He crossed the lot toward Janai's car, and in the space of a few steps, the quiet routine of the evening was shattered. He was at her window before she could even register what was happening. A command barked out, sharp, urgent, "Get out of the car!" The words didn't leave room for questions, but there was no time for her to comply, no chance to reason with him or beg for her life. The shot came fast. A single deafening crack ripped through the air, the sound bouncing off the brick walls and parked cars. The force of the bullet tore through her chest. Pain bloomed instantly, stealing her breath. Her hands might have reached instinctively for the wound, but the attacker wasn't finished. He yanked the door open, dragged her out onto the hot asphalt, and left her there, discarded like she was nothing. Around the lot, people froze. A bus driver nearby turned toward the sound and saw the man shove Janai to the ground before sliding into her car. Tires squealed as he sped away, the Dodge disappearing into the darkness beyond the mall. Janai lay on the pavement, her breath short and shallow, her voice trembling as she called for help. A few witnesses broke from their shock and rushed to her side. Someone dialed 911, their voice shaking as they told the dispatcher a woman had just been shot. Within minutes, paramedics were there, kneeling beside her, their hands moving quickly, their words urgent. They loaded her onto a stretcher, their pace matched by the flashing red and blue lights that now filled the lot. At the hospital, surgeons worked fast. Every second mattered, but the wound was too severe. Just 10 minutes into surgery, Janai's heart gave out. The life that had been so full, so steady, was gone. Words spread quickly. Friends, family, co-workers, each one hearing the same incomprehensible sentence: Janai's been killed. For those who loved her, it didn't make sense. She wasn't in the wrong place. She wasn't living a dangerous life. She had been sitting in her car, waiting for her daughter. To the detectives, the question was immediate and relentless. Was this just a carjacking, or had something far more personal, far more deliberate, unfolded in that parking lot? First clues and the cigarette. From the very start, the investigation carried an undercurrent of urgency. Detectives knew that with a crime this violent, every passing hour made finding the killer harder. The scene in the parking lot was combed over in detail. Officers moved in slow, deliberate sweeps, flashlights cutting through the dark. Evidence markers dotted the asphalt like a trail of unanswered questions. But the most important lead wasn't in the parking lot at all. It was somewhere out there, still in motion. Janai's gold Dodge Stratus had vanished into the night with her killer behind the wheel. If they could find the car, they might find the man. For nearly a full day, there was nothing. No sightings, no tips. Then on July 19th, 2008, a call came in. The Dodge had been found abandoned in Forest Park, 30 miles from where Janai was shot. It was parked in an unremarkable spot. No attempt was made to hide it. The killer had simply walked away. The vehicle was towed to the crime lab, where forensic analysts began their slow, meticulous work. Every inch of the interior was examined: the seats, the dashboard, the door handles, anything that could hold a fingerprint or trace of DNA. On the surface, the car seemed untouched. No bloodstains, no signs of a struggle beyond what had been seen in the parking lot. But then, under the driver's seat, a small detail emerged: a cigarette butt. It didn't look like much. A common brand, burned halfway down, ash still clinging to the paper. But to seasoned detectives, it was more than litter. Cigarettes are personal. People have preferences, brands, flavors, and the way they're smoked. If they could extract DNA from the filter, it could point them directly to the person who'd been in that driver's seat after the murder. That hope was enough to keep them moving. The cigarette was sealed and sent to the lab for testing. Meanwhile, detectives turned their attention to the gas station across from the scene, hoping the cameras had been rolling that night. The footage they pulled told part of the story. They saw people coming and going, cars pulling up to pumps, but the camera didn't capture the exact spot where Janai was killed. They couldn't see the shooting. They needed a witness, someone who had seen what the camera missed. They found one in a bus driver who'd been nearby. She remembered the sound of the gunshot, the sight of a man dragging Janai from her car and then taking off in it. She described him as a black male, wearing khaki shorts and a white shirt with green sleeves. It was a start, and it became even more valuable when word came that a man matching that description had been spotted in Forest Park around the same time Janai's car was abandoned. Now the two locations, the parking lot and the car's final resting place, were linked by more than just a vehicle. Then came the second piece of luck. Surveillance cameras at a gas station in Forest Park showed the same man twice. First, buy something small before leaving. Then, returning to purchase a pack of Benson & Hedges cigarettes, the same brand as the one found in Janai's car. The pieces were starting to line up. A witness description, surveillance footage, a matching brand of cigarettes. The killer's face, frozen in a few frames of security video. Detectives were closing in. At least, that's what they thought. What they didn't know yet was that this case wasn't about to end. It was about to get much more complicated. The first suspect appears. For detectives, Cases like this don't often come with such a clear trail. They had a witness who could place the suspect at the scene. They had footage showing him with the same brand of cigarettes found in the victim's car. They had his image preserved in grainy surveillance frames. All they needed now was a name to go with the face. They circulated the stills, asked around, pulled every thread they could, but without an identity. All of it was circumstantial. The hope was that DNA from the cigarette butt would deliver the missing piece. Weeks passed, then months. The lab results finally came back, but they didn't give detectives the win they expected. The fingerprints in Janai's car, no match in any database. The DNA from the cigarette, also no match. Whoever this man was, he was a ghost to the system, with no criminal record, no prior arrests, and no way to trace him through the usual channels. That's when the case began to slow. Leads dried up. The footage sat in evidence folders, reviewed again and again by frustrated investigators. The public release of the surveillance video brought in tips, but none panned out. The image was too grainy, the man's face partly obscured. The case that had started with urgency and momentum began to cool. For the Coleman family, it was unbearable. They had lost Janai in the most brutal way possible, and now the man responsible was somewhere out there, living freely. Detectives didn't give up entirely. Cold cases rarely mean no work at all. The file was still open, waiting for a break. But in the back of everyone's mind was the quiet, growing fear that the break might never come, and it would take nearly 2 years for that fear to be proven wrong. And when the call finally came, it didn't just give them a suspect, it lit a fuse on a twist no one saw coming.
Now first, like always, be sure to hit the like button down below. It helps us out tremendously with the reach of this video. Thank you.
The cold case breaks. It was February 2010 when the silence finally cracked. A notification appeared from CODIS, the National DNA Database. The cigarette butt from Janai's car had found a match. The suspect wasn't a ghost anymore. His name was Donald Eugene Smith, 50 years old, and his profile had just entered the system after a recent drug conviction. Detectives compared his mugshot to the grainy surveillance images. The resemblance was undeniable. The build, the facial features, the same shape of the head and jaw, all lined up. For investigators who had been staring at a wall for nearly 2 years, this was the door they'd been waiting to open. They moved quickly, securing a court order and bringing Donald in for questioning. Sitting across from them, he looked calm, almost disinterested. They expected some pushback. Most suspects deny their crimes at first, but nothing prepared them for the certainty in his voice. "I've never seen that car before," he said. "Never met that woman in my life." It was the kind of statement that made detectives lean in. They had DNA evidence linking him directly to Janai's car. Witnesses had described a man who looked like him. Surveillance footage had tracked his movements. Yet here he was, meeting their evidence with a flat, unwavering denial. Detectives tried a softer approach first. Maybe he had known Janai casually. Maybe he had been in her car for an innocent reason. Anything to explain the DNA, but Donald didn't budge. He insisted he had never been near her, never touched her car, never set eyes on her before. The more they pressed, the more intriguing it became. It wasn't the defiance of a man caught in a lie, it was something else. And then Donald gave them a reason, a strange one. "Maybe," he said slowly, "you got my DNA because it was my brother." The detectives stopped. "Your brother?" "My twin brother," he clarified. "Identical twin." It wasn't a joke. He said it as plainly as if he were telling them his birthday. Identical twins share the same DNA profile, which meant the forensic evidence that had led straight to Donald could just as easily point to someone else. In an instant, the investigation shifted. What had seemed like the end of the road was now the start of a very different path, one with 2 possible suspects, one set of DNA, and a question that would be far harder to answer. Which twin had pulled the trigger? The twin twist. The room felt heavier after Donald said the words, identical twin. Detectives exchanged quick, silent looks because this wasn't something they dealt with every day. Identical twins don't just look alike, they share the same genetic code. A DNA match, the one piece of evidence that usually seals a case, suddenly wasn't enough. Donald sat back in his chair, almost relaxed now, as if handing them this revelation had taken a weight off his shoulders. "If it wasn't me," he said, "it had to be him." The him was Ronald Smith, born minutes apart from Donald, raised in the same house, living just a short drive from the crime scene. On paper, the brothers were reflections of each other. But detectives knew the truth might be more complicated. Was Donald deflecting blame to protect himself? Or was Ronald the real killer, hiding behind the perfect alibi of shared DNA? The problem was, the only way to find out was to confront Ronald directly, but that was easier said than done. Detectives asked where he lived, how to find him. Donald hesitated, clearly weighing how much he wanted to say. When pressed, he finally admitted that Ronald stayed in Gwinnett County and gave them enough to track him down. Still, they weren't sure what they were dealing with. Was this a calculated move to buy Donald time? Was it an act of betrayal between brothers? Or was it a reluctant confession that pointed them in the right direction? The stakes had just doubled. They were no longer chasing one man, they were chasing the truth between two men who could swap places in almost any witness's memory. Two men whose DNA could be found in the same crime scene without proving which one had been there. And in this case, the truth wasn't just about science, it was about human behavior, about cracks in stories, about the moments when one twin might slip and reveal something the other never would. The hunt for Ronald was on, but finding him would reveal that this investigation was far from straightforward, and that the lines between loyalty and guilt could blur in ways no detective could fully prepare for. Shifting focus to Ronald didn't make it easy. When detectives first reached out, he avoided them. Calls went unanswered, messages were ignored, and then, when they tried to make contact in person, he simply wasn't there. It felt less like bad timing and more like deliberate evasion. Eventually, the search ended at his parents' home. Ronald was found inside, not in the open but tucked away, as if hoping they might walk out without spotting him. If Donald's demeanor in the interrogation room had been calm and collected, Ronald's was the opposite. The moment he was brought in, there was a restless energy about him, shoulders tight, gaze flicking between corners of the room, hands never still. In the early minutes of questioning, he gave little away. He seemed almost determined to run the clock down with small, scattered responses. But then came a phone call. The detectives allowed him to speak briefly to someone close to him. It wasn't the words that drew attention, it was the tone. "I'm in deep," he said. The kind of phrase that doesn't come from someone innocent and misunderstood. Detectives saw their opening. If he were feeling the pressure, maybe they could break him. They decided to use the most direct weapon they had, his brother. They brought Donald into the conversation, hoping that a face-to-face moment would shake loose the truth. It didn't work. Whatever bond existed between the two, it wasn't enough to trigger an outpouring of confession or blame. The brothers kept their conversations guarded, their body language careful. That left detectives with the same problem they'd had before. One set of DNA, two men it could belong to, and no proof which one had been behind the wheel of Janai Coleman's car that night. Still, there were other ways to narrow the field. Sometimes it's not about the rare clue, it's about the ordinary ones, the everyday habits people don't think twice about. And with Ronald, one of those habits was about to speak louder than his words. The brand of cigarette. Interrogations are built on details, small things that seem meaningless until they lock into place. For Ronald, that detail came during a routine break. He'd been sitting in the interview room for hours, shifting in his chair, avoiding direct answers. When detectives offered him a smoke break, he accepted without hesitation. Out in the hallway, under the watchful eye of an officer, he reached into a pack and pulled one out. It was the same brand found in Janai Coleman's car. The detectives didn't need to say it out loud, the connection was immediate. Months earlier, that cigarette butt had been a faint hope for DNA evidence. Now it was a direct, visual link between Ronald and the inside of Janai's Dodge Stratus. This wasn't the same as a fingerprint, but it was a piece of the puzzle that no longer fit comfortably into a story about mistaken identity. When they brought him back inside, the questions took on a sharper edge. This time, Ronald didn't deny being there outright. Instead, his story shifted. He leaned forward, speaking slowly. "It was an accident," he said. The words hung in the air, too careful, too measured. He described the gun as having a hair trigger, so sensitive, he claimed, that it had gone off earlier that same day in a hotel room without him meaning to fire it. According to Ronald, he'd only approached Janai to take her car. He wanted a quick getaway, nothing more, but when he pointed the gun at her, it went off in his hand. He swore he hadn't meant to pull the trigger, swore he hadn't dragged her from the vehicle. She got out on her own, he insisted, and he panicked, driving off into the night. It was a neat story, one that painted him as reckless rather than cold-blooded, but detectives had heard it all before. Accidental shootings, split-second mistakes, these were easy shields to hide behind. The truth was often simpler and far less forgiving. Ronald had just given them his version of events. Now it would be up to the courts to decide whether they believed him, or whether the cigarette, the surveillance footage, and the trail of his own words told a different story entirely. Trial and the final lie. When Ronald Smith's trial began, the prosecution built its case piece by piece, methodically showing the jury the chain of evidence. There was the DNA from the cigarette butt in Janai's car, the surveillance footage showing a man in khaki shorts and a white shirt with green sleeves, and the gas station purchase of the same brand of cigarettes found under the driver's seat. There were witness descriptions that matched him almost perfectly. Initially, Ronald's own words to detectives were part of that chain. He had admitted to confronting Janai, pointing a gun at her and firing, though he insisted it was an accident caused by a hair trigger weapon. It was a story that still placed him at the center of the crime. But once in court, Ronald shifted again. The accident narrative disappeared. In its place, he offered something bolder: blame. He told the jury it was not he, but his identical twin brother Donald who had pulled the trigger. He claimed he only became involved afterward, helping to clean up and dispose of the stolen car. The problem for Ronald was that the evidence didn't bend to fit this new story. The clothing in the surveillance footage matched what witnesses saw on the killer that night. The brand of cigarettes was linked directly to Ronald's smoking habits, and his earlier recorded confession to detectives didn't mention his brother at all. It placed him there with the gun in the moment. The jury saw the contradictions for what they were. They deliberated, weighed the evidence, and found him guilty of murder and related charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison plus 25 years. Donald walked free, but the case left an unsettling truth. Even when the verdict is clear, the lies told along the way never really disappear. Reflection and aftermath. In the days after the sentencing, the courtroom emptied, the cameras packed away, and the headlines moved on. But for the people who loved Janai Coleman, the world didn't snap back to normal. Her 3 adopted children faced a future without the steady presence that had anchored their lives. They had lost not just a mother, but the home she had built for them, one filled with routines, laughter, and quiet reassurances that they were safe. That security was gone in a single moment, replaced by the echo of a gunshot and 1,000 unanswerable questions. At the school where Janai had taught, her absence was felt in every corner. The desk where she kept her lesson plans sat untouched. Students passed her classroom door and glanced in, as if half expecting her to be there with that calm, steady smile. Parents remembered the teacher who had gone out of her way to help their children, not just with grades, but with life. For her friends, the loss was harder to put into words. It was in the empty chair at the dinner table, the unreturned phone calls, the simple fact that they could no longer hear her voice. They had to live with the knowledge that she had been taken not to some far-off, dangerous place, but in the middle of an ordinary night, doing something she had done dozens of times before. And then there was the case itself, twins bound by blood, but divided by guilt, the strange tangle of shared DNA and shifting stories. In the end, it wasn't science that decided Ronald's fate. It was the slow, relentless weight of small truths stacking one on top of the other until they formed something unshakable. Justice, if you could call it that, came not with triumph, but with a quiet, lingering ache. Ronald Smith would never walk free again, but neither would Janai's family ever get her back. Some crimes end in a moment. This one will echo through the lives of her children, through the halls of her school, and through the memories of everyone who loved her, long after the courtroom lights went dark. Janai Coleman's story isn't just about a murder, it's about the fragility of ordinary moments. A routine night, a familiar place, and the belief that safety is a given. It's about how violence doesn't always announce itself until it's too late, and how justice, when it comes, can feel incomplete. Ronald Smith's conviction closed the case, but it couldn't fill the space Janai left behind. Her children, her students, her friends, they carry her forward in ways the court can't measure. In the end, what lingers isn't just the crime, but the reminder that even the smallest moments are never truly guaranteed.